Oh, wow. So you had 3 smokers at Colorado Muay Thai, which they do a good job of promoting smokers here locally, and then you went to Thailand after that.
Yeah, and I don't think I had the intention of fighting so much as I just wanted to pack in this training during this month. I had this like critical time block I had where I didn't have any commitments with school or work, and I just took advantage of it. And then, being presented with a full rules fight after 2 smokers, in hindsight, I probably would have thought about it a little bit more, but I had just drank a 40 and the Thai came up to me and told me to do it, so I did it. And
Cool.
It resulted in a lot of damage in that fight I thought the fight was 3 rounds, it was 5. And I ended up winning on points.
Nice.
That was the most mangled I've ever been in a fight. I hope I'm never that banged up again.
Wow. Welcome to the Prize Fighting Business. I'm your host, Daniel Casado, and today my guest is Muay Thai fighter and Easton Muay Thai assistant coach, Steve Eisman. Steve has 11 Muay Thai fights overall, with a 6-3-1 record as a Nak Muay, and he also has amateur boxing experience with a 1-0 record. He balances his pursuit of martial arts while still maintaining a full-time day job. He'll be traveling to Des Moines, Iowa in 2 weeks, June 20th through the 23rd, for the TBAs National Muay Thai Tournament, where he'll be coaching 7 of the Easton Muay Thai team members. He sat down with me to talk about his time as a fighter, his experience training and fighting in Thailand, as well as the perspective this has given him in his newer pursuits of being a Muay Thai coach. So let's dive into Steve's martial arts journey. Steve, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Steve, you are preparing to be an assistant coach for the national tournament that is the TBAs, a Muay Thai national tournament in Des Moines, Iowa. And you're taking a team of 7 Nak Muays or 7 Muay Thai practitioners. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. I'll be going with Coach Sean out of the Boulder location. We got, I think, 6 and then 2 from the Denver location. So it should be a busy weekend. Flying in right from a work conference, so it should be a roller coaster for a few days, but it'll be fun.
Oh, wow. So you have a day job and then you're an assistant coach in the evening, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I've been working full-time outside of my gym obligations as a coach or as a competitor for, I'd say about 4 years now. So I do the whole 9 to 5, and then if there's a fight, I'm just training in the morning and the evenings after work, or if I'm coaching, I'm doing the same thing with classes and the comp team.
So it's a lifestyle for you. I mean, you're essentially living it. When you're not at work, you're at the gym, or you're working with these aspiring athletes.
It's pretty much all I do. Yeah, it's eat, sleep, train. Easton's like a second home at this point in my life. So yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way though.
Yeah. So your upcoming event that you're coaching at is the TBAs. So it's a national Muay Thai tournament in Des Moines, Iowa. You're flying out right after your work conference to coach these 6 athletes from Easton Muay Thai in Boulder, and then 2 fighters from Easton Muay Thai in Denver. But the team generally trains together, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There's no segregation between any of the Easton gyms. We're one team, we're one unit, and we're going to be coaching everyone as such.
Cool. And so this is a national tournament again. So what is the level of, or what is the experience level of a lot of the fighters that are going to compete at this?
Sure. So I can only speak on behalf of our guys, but we're putting the majority of our fighters are going to be in B class.
Okay.
So B class for the national tournaments specific to the TBAs, they just updated the policy with how many fights you have per class. I think C class or novice is 0 to 3. B class would be 4 to 12 fights, and A class would be 13 and above. And an interesting thing they're doing now with the A class is they are allowing pros to compete in that division unpaid, but it allows for ring experience. So they're allowed to compete against amateurs, and I believe it's pro rules besides the elbow pads.
Very interesting. Yeah, I was wondering about that. So A class being 13 plus fights, really, I mean, you could be facing someone with 100 fights or someone with 15 fights.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that someone with 100 fights has moved past the TBAs.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely the biggest, I think, disparity between I mean, someone that has 10, 11 fights or right on the cusp of that B class, A class, goes A class with 13 fights in the first, outing they have at that division, they're fighting a guy with 30, 40 fights. It happens pretty frequently, which I don't think is bad. Losing at your first outing in an A class tournament and performing well, I think is a testament to how well you're progressing. So, not everyone's going to go out into the A class their first attempt and do well.
Sure.
But I definitely think it's a good kind of checkpoint to see where you're going as an athlete and where you can improve on.
Yeah, and it's a stark contrast from something like competing in Thailand, where you're pro in your first fight, essentially. You're getting paid to fight, at least, in the U.S., that's being considered a pro if you're getting paid to fight in the U.S. But here, they're breaking it up into that C class, B class, A class, so that hopefully you can progress without getting hurt too badly, potentially, but also kind of building upon the skills, building upon your skills foundation, because if I remember correctly, C class, you're not allowed to use all the weapons, and then B class, they add some weapons, and then A class, it's essentially pro rules. Is that how it works?
Yeah, C class, the only differential is there's no elbows allowed in C class.
Okay.
C class and B class both require gloves and shin pads, shin guards, just cloth slip-ons. Once you go to B class, elbows will be allowed with elbow pads. And I'm a little unfamiliar with the rules in terms of the normal fights at the A class, but I know the finals is always just gloves and shin guards. I'm sorry, just gloves and elbow pads.
I see.
So if there were pros involved, I'm not sure how that would look, but they definitely cut back on the gear, like you said, as you advance through the divisions.
And everybody that you're traveling with, as far as the athletes, are going to be in the B class for this tournament, at least specifically?
I'd like to say I think we have 3 in C class, and then the rest are B class, or I think we may have 1 A class, but the majority are B class.
Okay. And so what does training and preparation for a national tournament like this look like for these fighters?
I mean, I don't think we break the mold too much in terms of fight camps go. We've placed a heavy emphasis on letting them know that this is a big deal, that we're moving them sort of to the next iteration of their competitive career as an amateur. Competing outside of Colorado is obviously a big test in its own right. But we want to make sure that they know they're getting kind of a taste of what the rest of the country looks like in terms of competition, which, if you don't live on one side of the coast, California or the tri-state area, it's hard to find fights locally. A lot of good fighters come from California because the state's so massive, so there's a big saturation. There's a lot of competition, a lot of opportunity to compete there locally. And the same with the tri-state area. It's easy to jump borders of the state and find new fights, and good promotions obviously help. But states in the Midwest, hopefully this changes, but we're much more reliant on these national tournaments in order to get ring experience. It's very easy to go long periods of time without a fight in your own backyard. So
it sounds like you're saying this is going to be the first time for a lot of these fighters to travel nationally to test their skills.
Yeah, I think for the majority of them, it'll be their first time ever.
So how do they get experience on the local level? In the Midwest or in Colorado specifically?
So, I mean, every state has at least one promotion that we can rely on.
Okay.
50-280 out here has been very good to us in keeping our guys active, especially guys in that C-class bracket, 0 to 4 fights. You always got to tip your hat to MMA promotions that are willing to highlight kickboxing or Muay Thai fights. It becomes tricky just because the scoring is usually MMA judges scoring a Muay Thai fight. So a lot of the times you see maybe not the best Muay Thai, and it more kind of resembles an MMA fight, but just striking. So a lot of brawling exchanges, wild punches, definitely not as refined or balanced looking as you'll see, high-level amateurs look in A-class TBAs, for example. But it's something, right? It's something that isn't MMA, and being in a niche sport like Muay Thai or kickboxing, beggars can't really be choosers.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a very interesting point to highlight. I mean, what do you see as the biggest differences between MMA scoring and Muay Thai scoring, or what are the differences in those two scoring criteria?
There's a lot of variables, I would say. In terms of strikes in general, I think damage is going to be what is focused on just as a collective whole with MMA. If you want to look at how, I guess, stadium-style Muay Thai is scored.
Yeah, traditionally.
Sure. Elbows score, middle body kicks score the highest, knees score heavily. Unless you're scoring 8 counts or finishing people with your boxing, punches typically don't score very high. And the same goes with anything that attacks the lower half of the body. So the outside low kick, the inside low kick. Low kicks are obviously very effective. They're very, very fundamental to anyone's striking game.
Yeah.
But unless you're finishing people or stopping people with the low kick, it's not a very high-scoring weapon. So there's a lot of like weapons that people focus on and really try and improve quickly when they're learning how to score for judges that are friendly with Muay Thai or are aware of what they're looking at exactly. But, you can't really discredit MMA in the sense that there's just so many variables that they need to focus on outside of striking with their grappling, the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu. MMA is scored collectively on damage, right? So they're not dividing the stand-up portion of the fight from the grappling portion of the fight. It's scored as a collective whole. Muay Thai is, if there's one subcategory of the kicking, the punching, and the stand-up, it's the clinch work or the neck wrestling, where you can see a lot of dominance occur with high-level ties because it sets up big scoring weapons like the elbow, the knee. It also just shows dominance if they're ragdolling someone in the clinch for 5 rounds.
Yeah.
It's hard for the judges to discredit that.
Right. So how do you find a balance when you're approaching coaching these fighters? I mean, are you coaching more towards Muay Thai rules since, that's the name of the team, or is it something where you're coaching them specific to the competition they're entering?
Both, I'd like to think. I mean, the majority of my focus and time and energy has been spent studying and getting better at competing at and coaching Muay Thai in a pretty traditional sense. Obviously, boxing has its place, but scoring or teaching a style that's scoring friendly based on the unified rules that the United States is working on for IFMA, I think that's really been my heaviest focus, but I've dabbled with MMA striking with MMA guys I've worked with in the past. I've worked a little bit with boxing and figuring out how to work as a better corner for a boxing match. But really, I'm just trying to be as dynamic and diverse as possible as a coach. And I'd like to say the same thing about myself as a competitor just because I want to not box myself into one specific style. I don't think any fighter wants to do that. They don't want to be just Thai or just a Dutch style of kickboxing. They want to ideally be good at everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so at least specifically for preparation for TBAs coming up, when you're coaching, do you guys have any focus on cardio, or is that something that you feel the fighters need to take care of on their own and then focus on skill training when they're with you?
We definitely make them run the gauntlet Thursday nights with the conditioning. The conditioning is sort of an offshoot of just training hard, right?
Okay.
So if they're getting their pad work in and they're showing up to class and they're doing what they're told with the road work, prescribing to either the USMF strength and conditioning program we gave them, I don't want to focus too much of my time on their fitness, right? So if I see that a fighter is currently struggling during drilling or pad work to the point where it's like detrimental to their partner's work, that's a conversation I need to have with that student separately. But in a way, it is on you to be in good enough condition to maintain and kind of bring something to the table to eat when it comes to being on this team. Fortunately, I don't have any students at this point that have that issue. They've put in a lot of work over the last few weeks. I'm real proud of them.
Yeah, that's great. So the cardio aspect of things, you have this structure, you have these guidelines for them, but it's not something that you're going to watch over them doing. You just have this expectation they'll take care of it. It'll show in their training if they're taking care of the cardio aspect of things or not. And if not, then you have that conversation.
I trust our fighters, and I think that's really what it comes down to. With the resources we have being very limited, Sean being the head coach, and then having obligations around the country with Team Elevation, and then myself, Wes, Danny, Matt taking up the realms as assistant coaches, there's only so many eyes in the room on a group of 12, 13 people, 7 specifically that are competing. I have to trust that they're going to do the stuff prescribed to them when no one's looking, because we'll know. I mean, we'll know on Saturday morning during hard sparring, and we'll definitely know during the fight. So, you know, it's very refreshing to see, like, you know, when I walk in on a Wednesday to give pads to someone or have a private scheduled outside of the classes, and I see one of my students on the treadmill doing their conditioning, you know, when you see that repeatedly, it's very easy to be like, okay, they've got this.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you are holding pads in these one-on-one sessions for a lot of these fighters. Is that a normal part of their training where they would be going to the classes and doing pads, or is it one or the other?
Yeah, great question. So I think when an individual has a fight, they're going to get more one-on-one attention from a coach. That's just how good coaches operate. But coaches, again, are limited with the amount of bandwidth they have, especially if the team gets bigger and bigger. We are heavily reliant on the work they're getting in with their fellow students during the class. I take those classes when I'm able to and I'm not teaching. And I rely on that class to get my conditioning in with good partners. So the pad work you're getting with a coach outside of what coaches charge for private lessons, the pad holding you get twice a week getting ready for a fight is free, and that extra one-on-one attention, it just kind of comes with the territory. We need to make sure that these guys are supported when going through a fight camp, because if done correctly, it's horrible, like most people know. So if there's not a fight on the books, you know, I expect 5 training sessions a week. And if they are competing, you know, adding in those supplemental workouts, whether it's the road work, the bag work, the attention from a coach, whatever that may be, that's kind of necessary in order to kind of ramp up properly.
Absolutely. And it does seem like pad holding is a big part of Muay Thai, at least the skills-based training. So when you're holding pads for your fighters, for your athletes that you're coaching, is it something where you're helping them refine their technique, or is it more repetition of the reps, the way that they throw it?
Yeah, it depends on the fighter, so it's very case by case. If there's like something mechanically wrong with a certain weapon they're using that needs to get sharper, then we focus on that. If I think they have a good enough grasp of their kind of the arsenal they have in front of them for the fight, I like to focus more on the game plan. Maybe I have a right-handed fighter fighting a lefty for the first time. You know, the focus is obviously going to be on neutralizing the lefty strategically. Or if we just, you know, if there's footage of a fighter, that's fine. I don't think it really matters as much with amateur fighters from 0 to 5 fights. I don't think there's watching footage on an opponent. I think it can just cause more anxiety than anything at that level. So just making sure that you're highlighting their attributes and making sure that they're well conditioned and you know, believing in them and making sure that they believe in themselves. That's really what my focus is.
Yeah, and you said that you don't watch too much film at the amateur level, at least, or there's not too much value in that. But do you have a strategy going into the fight based on maybe the fighter's strengths, or is it more you kind of see what happens in the first round and then go from there?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely making adjustments round by round, even if you're, decisively winning the fight. I mean, the strategy is always going to have to be a little bit adaptable during the rounds. But specific to what you asked, I think at the amateur level, the best thing you can do is highlight the fighter's best weapons or what they do the most naturally, right? In terms of like probing weapons, right? The jab, the teep, the inside low kick, right? Generally speaking, an athlete's going to favor one of those 3 over the others, right? Some might love their jab. They might have like an extraordinarily long jab or a well-timed jab, but they feel very off-balanced and kind of slow with their teep. So I'm not going to sit here just because of the rule set and make them hyper-focus on a weapon that they're not naturally inclined to use. Rather, I'd rather kind of sharpen up the weapon they're already good at that point, and sort of diversify and make them more dynamic in the off season, so to speak. But when it's time to have a fight and there's a camp involved, I'm really just trying to make them confident and conditioned.
And focus on the strengths, like you said.
Exactly, and imposing their will, imposing their game plan, and really kind of giving that weapon that they prefer to use a platform to kind of be highlighted.
Right. Well, surely we'd like to see, each one of these fighters come home with a belt, with a championship. But what, in your mind, would success look like on a team level for these guys, or for these guys and girls?
Sure. I can't sit here and say, well, success looks like multiple belts, because I just think it becomes a little too materialistic. And, I think any good coach is going to say they would rather have a brilliant performance that resulted in a loss than a, excuse my language, shit performance that resulted in a win.
Yeah.
So my goals end for these guys performing at their peak potential. What I know their peak potential is, I know each of these guys intimately well from working with them, from sparring with them over the last few months to the last year. So I know what their benchmarks are, and I know where the goalpost is set for each of them. So in my mind, I have different goals than maybe the other coaches do or those people have for themselves,
Sure.
and that's okay. I think we're all trying to attain we're all trying to win, right?
Yeah.
Winning is obviously priority number one, but, there's other variables at place that I like to put a heavy emphasis on, heavier than just going out and winning and not learning or growing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier in the interview that you not only are working on being a dynamic coach, but also an athlete yourself. So is this something where you still train as a competitive fighter while you're coaching?
Yeah, no, I definitely, I'm definitely not done competing myself. I do think it's a bit of a power struggle, coaching and fighting. I don't think I'm capable of coaching while being in camp or with the mindset or the intention of competing. I don't think I'm capable of juggling both. So right now, my last fight was in December. Right now, my focus has been on sharpening up my coaching game and being a better role model in general to the students, but learning how to sort of communicate with them to get the best out of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do want to be able to shift and transition back into being an athlete myself. I don't know what my own, individualistic goals are as a fighter, but I know that I would like to say 20 fights before retiring fully and going into coaching. If nothing else, just to have the credentials. I want to know what it's like to be in the ugly fights. I want to know what it's like to be in the quick ones. I want to have the perspective of being in there.
Yeah.
And just representing Easton and kind of seeing how far I can go as an amateur myself.
Yeah.
And then passing that knowledge on is obviously the end goal or the long-term goal for my role in this sport.
And speaking to your experience level, you have 11 overall fights, 6-3-1 as a Muay Thai practitioner, a Nak Muay, and then 1-0 as a boxer.
Yep, that's correct.
And you also recently got out of a good experience fighting in Thailand, right?
Yeah, that was my third fight in Thailand. I've never had a bad experience. My first fight was they've all been bangers, but that was sort of a wake-up call to how the fight game specific to Muay Thai was approached in Taiwan. Just a different world in a lot of ways. At the same time, I try and approach it with a grain of salt when I travel to Taiwan because it's not fair to compare the sport of Muay Thai in Taiwan, the national sport of that country, to how it kind of manifests itself in the United States.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
Yeah.
Just like it's not fair to compare, soccer to its popularity here to how it is in Europe, right? I think the experience and the immersion in that variable is amazing. I love the people, the culture of the country. And the training I received there shaped me as a person more than I think it did as an athlete. And I'll be back, but I want to be able to compete as naturally as I do there in the States. And that includes starting faster, being a little more acclimated to the time, 3 2-minute rounds as opposed to 5 3s, and getting used to that pacing a little bit better.
Right.
I do think it's a different animal in a lot of ways once you factor in those type of variables and how it's scored in comparison to Thailand. So you can obviously become a much better fighter by training there and going there and learning from the source, but you need to keep that perspective when you come back to the States, that you're not fighting in Thailand.
Absolutely.
And the sport is definitely viewed differently.
And with the scoring, like you alluded to earlier.
Yes, yeah. The scoring is interesting because a lot of the camps in Taiwan place a heavy emphasis on the highest scoring weapons, whether that's elbows, the knees, countless body kicks left and right. The camp specifically I was at for the majority of my time, however, kind of took a different approach. There was a lot more of a focus on boxing.
What gym was that?
I was at Muay Thai camp for 3 months in 2014, and then just most recently in December for a month with my girlfriend, Portia. And always an amazing experience. I can't recommend that place enough. But what's unique to them is they're a very heavy-focused gym, like I said, on boxing and low kicks. Two of the weapons that, generally speaking, don't score very high in stadium Muay Thai. But their methodology is more, they would rather finish the fight in exciting fashion than play to the rule set and score and win on a decision. So, it's kind of a trademark of the Muay Thai style is you get, pressure-heavy, aggressive, three-punch combinations, fire off the outside low kick. And a lot of people just kind of fold under that pressure they've learned, and they just keep producing serial killers.
Yeah, and have you trained at any other gym while you've been in Thailand?
Yes, I was at a gym called Rawai Muay Thai in Phuket, just off Nahorn Beach, my first trip out in 2012. I was there for a month. At the time, it was kind of like a little hole-in-the-wall gym for Phuket, which was very saturated with a lot of gyms in the area. But the attention I got there from the trainers was so much more in-depth than one of the bigger gyms down the road I had checked out. So I stuck with them for the whole month, and then on 10 minutes notice, I took a fight at Bangla Stadium and had my first full rules fight there and won.
Nice.
Yeah, crazy night, but good memories.
Yeah. So the last fight was in Thailand, and that was at Max Muay Thai, which is a major promotion in Thailand. They have, I think, 5 nights a week of fights, and they stream them on Facebook. You can watch them on YouTube. So your last fight, you had 10 fights at the time, and you fought a Thai guy with, 40-something fights?
I think so, yeah.
What goes through your head when you're walking out to a fight like that?
I'll put it this way. I think after I was slated to be on Max, which was a surprise in itself, and kind of a show of good faith by PA, the owner of Muay Thai, to put me on a show like that. I was such a wreck the week of the fight. We had traveled to Pattaya, done the weigh-ins, and I was having trouble sleeping. I think it really just came down to feeling like, was I adequate enough skill-wise to represent Muay Thai? Because it's just a place I hold so, near and dear to my heart. So the biggest thing that kept me up at night was poorly representing the gym that put so much time and effort into me. And I think as the fight got closer and closer, I just sort of became a little more accepting of the situation. And then by the time we were driving to the venue that afternoon, I was just completely at peace, very calm. It's kind of a boiler room. Once you're back there, the Max Stadium looks really big and robust on TV, but it's 2,000 seats, very compact. In the changing room for 8 fighters on the card is maybe the size of this studio. So you get your Thai oil bath, you shadow box, gloves on, and then you're out. And they have one bathrobe for the whole blue corner. So it's very fly by night, quick, you're going from being very tranquil and peaceful and in your own space to, wraps on, shadow box, and now you're making the walk down the ramp to a huge crowd of people.
Wow.
And I just think I couldn't have asked for a better experience with it all, man. I think people kind of get lost in the bright lights and the production value of the show, but it's for Thailand, again, fighting is so nonchalant. I mean, some of these kids will go home from school, they'll eat, and then they'll shower, jump on a bus, and go fight on Max Muay Thai. And then the next day go back to school. And they'll do that twice a month. It's it's no big deal to them. So once I sort of put everything into perspective, I definitely think that helped with the nerves. And then just going out there and duking it out and trying to put on a good show, that made my night.
Oh, that's an awesome perspective. Thank you. So when was your last fight in the U.S.?
That was TBAs of last year.
Okay.
Did not get out of the first round with that one. Fought a tough Canadian kid. had some problems with calming my nerves for that fight. Being my first national tournament, I think I do a poor job of putting things on a pedestal and kind of glorifying them when I need to kind of keep things a little more present and just more sedated. So I learned the hard way with that first round, but it definitely gave me a good inside look at what these tournaments look like and what to expect.
Yeah, what does your preparation look like for a U.S. fight specifically? Yeah, because I'm obviously in Thailand. They've got their camp built up around these fights. You're going to this Thailand style of training. But how does it differ in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think volume's the big thing, right? So when you live at a camp like Sip Muay Thai, you train 6 hours a day every day, and pretty much everything you do outside of that is just like napping, reading, and eating. So being a full-time athlete out there, that is your job.
Right.
It's a great life. That volume of training with that intensity isn't possible here if you're working full-time and you have, just day-to-day responsibilities. So I think that helps kind of with just your threshold in terms of the knowledge and the amount of training you get back. You're also just recovering much faster, and you have less to stress about. In terms of training for a fight here in the U.S., at Easton while holding down a job, mindset, again, comes down to pacing. Being first right when the gloves touch, right when the bell rings, and realizing this is over in 6 minutes, which is the blink of an eye, right? And that's only 2 rounds in Taiwan, but that's the whole fight here. So being ready to get right after it once the bell rings. And at the same time with training camp and getting ready for a fight with those responsibilities I mentioned, there definitely needs to be a little bit more of a balancing act. You can't run yourself into the ground 3 weeks out from a fight, or you're going to hit a brick wall when you're supposed to be peaking, right? One of the things you notice with Thais, or even like really, really active fighters that are foreigners in Taiwan, camps are typically 10 to 15 days tops. And they're training constantly, but the intensity doesn't ramp up until about that 10-day window. So it's a very intense, like second to last week before the fight, but that's how they peak, mostly because they're fighting every month. Whereas in the U.S., I would never allow a fighter to compete on 10 days' notice unless I had seen them in the gym day in, day out doing their regular due diligence in terms of staying sharp with their skill set. But here, again, it's put a little bit more on a pedestal, like I said. So, okay, I'm 5 weeks out. So now I have this fixed window of time to ramp up and really bust my ass and get ready for this fight. Which, if you can pace yourself and peak at the right time, that's great. And obviously, sometimes that's uncontrollable with injuries and just how you feel on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of variables to take into account. Taiwan, you really, it's great because all you have to do is focus on training. You just wake up to run. Then you go to your trainer, and the trainer puts you through whatever he puts you through, pads, drilling, bag work, whatever. You're just told what to do and you do it, and it's very mindless. I love it that way.
Yeah.
When you're having to think about your diet and your preparation and time, it becomes more stressful.
Do you generally cut weight for your fights, either in Thailand or the U.S.?
I cut more weight in the U.S. I think it's just my wrestling background, and I have sort of like my first choice when it comes to my selection of like dietary needs and meal prepping and everything. It's much easier to control everything that goes in. Whereas in Taiwan, you're definitely a little bit more at the mercy of the food. It's ingrained into the culture. So
you're eating white rice, white carbs.
Yeah, chicken and rice. Yeah. I mean, chicken, rice, and green veggies, and that's why they're in such good shape. The diet's extremely healthy, but you're a little more reliant on old school methods of cutting weight if you're not careful with your diet on a day-to-day basis, running in a sweatsuit, shadow boxing in a sweatsuit. And if you have the right Thai trainer, they're going to keep an eye on you and make sure that you're safe. But there's definitely more room for error and potentially overdoing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're cutting weight for an American fight, because you have that ability to cut a little bit greater amounts of weight, what range are you talking about as far as maybe not walking around outside of camp, but like the beginning of camp to fight day or weigh-in day?
So I normally walk at about 53, 52. And like if it's a one-off fight with not multiple weigh-ins, I'll fight at 135.
Okay.
So, I mean, once I'm in camp, I like to be walking around in shape without really cutting calories at about 147.
Okay. 12 pounds or so?
Yeah, and I usually maintain that all the way till the week of the fight. And then with the water load and maybe one Epsom salt bath, I'll wake up at 140 weigh-in day and the bath will take off the other 5 pounds.
It doesn't sound like it's too painful for you as far as to the point where it's detrimental to your performance.
It's only horrible if I slack on my diet. So
Sure.
if I stay like really tried and true to the diet for 3 solid weeks, it's very doable and it doesn't affect my cardio or my energy at all.
Okay. So what do your expenses associated with training look like? Because obviously you're a coach as well. So does that, do you get like training subsidized in exchange for coaching? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, so when I finished college, I was basically just working full-time as a freelance journalist and as a staff member at Easton. So teaching both kickboxing and Muay Thai classes. So I was I was a paid employee. Cool. When I started at Easton all those years ago, I think I was paying for maybe 4 or 5 months, and then Mike, the CEO of Easton, put me on basically doing cleaning crew. So every Wednesday night, which was like hard sparring night, I would go in, take my whooping, and then stay afterwards, clean the gym up, and that pretty much paid for my membership.
It's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, it was definitely like my up and coming time in college. That was like one memory I'll always remember. And then eventually graduated from cleaning crew to teaching orientations, like intro classes, and then being put on the schedule full time when we moved locations from 30th and Arapahoe to the current headquarters now.
Very nice. So outside of training Muay Thai, because you don't have like jiu-jitsu or wrestling you have to worry about necessarily, what expenses do you find associated with training? Just transportation, food, anything else that stands out to you?
I've invested in a strength and conditioning coach
Cool.
So at one point, my conditioning coach, who also thought I was coaching, so it was a simple trade. Once that relationship kind of had to change, I would just pay money for the service because I thought I was, he had done wonders just, for my performance and for my body, and being very, I guess, specific and programmatic with the conditioning. So that guidance was huge, and I just kind of like take those gems and implement them into my own system now. So I definitely made an investment there. I've made investment in nutrition plans, meal prepping,
Cool.
Things like that. But overall, I think costs associated with it is just the cost of competing to fight.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Or paying to fight.
Right, as an amateur. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think MMA is saturated enough now as an amateur. You're never paying money to fight.
Mm-hmm.
In Muay Thai, if, like I said, like I previously mentioned, with Midwestern states that don't get as much opportunity with local promotions like California or the East Coast, I think paying money for these national tournaments becomes kind of a regular occurrence. And depending on where you live, that can look like anywhere from $750 to $1,200 in a single weekend.
So another item that could potentially keep you from fighting quite as often as you'd like.
Unfortunately, yes, and that's a problem with a lot of people. I think, keeping promoters in mind, I think if we could just create an opportunity for fighters to almost get like smokers once a month, or almost like non-sanctioned fights that go on your record, wins and losses, hosted by gyms, with a referee, with paramedics on scene. Almost everything you would get from a normal amateur fight without all the commitment, glitz, and glamour of like a promotion, right?
Yeah.
Where fighters are like pressured to sell tickets and do this and that on top of training. This is simply like you show up to the gym, you're matched up based on who your coach does the communication with, and all your job is to train for that fight and then compete. And if you could do that once a month without any publicity or attention, I think that would do wonders for the U.S. Muay Thai scene as a whole.
Absolutely. Build that experience up. So as far as you train Muay Thai pretty much 5 days a week, you're coaching Muay Thai, you're going to your day job, obviously injury can happen. Your healthcare insurance, is that taking care of your day job?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Nice.
fortunately. I would not, I think it sucks that health insurance is tied to employment. I really wish there was an alternative way. Not to get on my soapbox here,
Sure.
where fighters could unionize and get the necessary benefits they need in order to train with the full-fledged commitment and intensity they want to train with,
Right.
without feeling hindered by, oh, well, what if I get injured? I can't afford that to happen. I can't be injured for a fight that is going to pay my bills. Like, I think that's really awful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's an idealist's view of things, but I would like to see all fighters to have some sort of medical arrangement, and not just being contingent with the promotion, right? So if the injury occurs during a fight, I think I read somewhere statistically you're so much more likely to get injured just on the day-to-day training in the practice room than you are in the actual fight, right? So what good is it that they're only insured, so to speak, during the fight, right? They need some sort of retainer or plan in place that if something happens in the practice room, they're covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Some kind of maybe short-term insurance through training
Exactly.
camp or whatever.
Exactly.
Interesting.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So take me back to kind of how you got started in mixed martial arts in general, but Muay Thai specifically. You mentioned you wrestled in the past as well.
Sure, yeah. So martial arts for me started when I was 10
Nice.
with Taekwondo. I did that for 4 years. I had maybe 30 of the Olympic-style point sparring matches. And I had a blast doing that, and I was successful at it. But there was a variable about it that was missing for me. I think it was very limited in the sense that it was not like contact-based, it was point-based, right? Punches to the head were not allowed. So it was a weird way of like crippling the essence of a fight. And it was fun to move around and not have to be concerned about like damage being inflicted, especially when you're competing in middle school. Like a lot of us haven't hit puberty yet.
Yeah.
So, but those 30 some odd matches I had, they were fun. But I think that kind of tapped into an aggression I wanted to express that Taekwondo didn't really allow. I wrestled through high school, and then
A lot more aggressive of a sport.
yeah, and not a sport that I understood as well as stand-up from my experiences so far. It was something that I enjoyed because of the physicality and the intensity of it, but it was something that was a lot harder for me to grasp compared to being successful with the Taekwondo. Finished high school, and then I moved to Denver for my first year of college, and I found this dumpy boxing gym that has a pretty good following here in Colorado, but I mean, it was classic boxing training. They just put you on the bag and ignore you until they might need you as a body to spar, and that's kind of how I started sparring and sort of seeing how the physicality and the intensity that I experienced in wrestling kind of meet or bridge that gap with Taekwondo. It was this like violent form of striking, and I was like, man, I am a fish out of water right now. Had my one boxing match, won it. It was just a...
So that was your first fight, the boxing match.
Yeah, and it was a ugly, shameful, nasty brawl. There wasn't really any boxing involved. But it sparked something in me. And then I transferred to Boulder after doing my year in Denver. And it was on my 20th birthday I signed up for Easton just because I knew I was like, I loved the MMA, I loved watching it. And I just felt like it was passing me by at that age, and I thought like, well, these guys are starting so young, I have to do this like now or never.
Yep.
And then when I started, I don't think it took more than maybe 3 weeks for me to realize that I just didn't have the same passion for the jiu-jitsu as I did for the striking or what I experienced with the Taekwondo and the boxing.
Right.
And I guess that perfect marriage looked like kickboxing or Muay Thai.
Yeah.
And then that's really where I was like, okay, I want to go all in on this.
So that's 20 years old. You're at Easton Boulder at the time, the old location you mentioned, and you decide this Muay Thai kickboxing aspect of martial arts is really what you want to pursue.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, yeah, it's been 8 years now, right? So I think initially I loved spending all my waking time outside of like homework and work, going there and spending all my time there, but I don't know if I ever had the inclination to go career with it in terms of being a fighter,
Sure.
right? I love to compete. I love to fight. I thought it was a blast, but I didn't know if there was any real trajectory for me there, rather than it was something that kept me away from partying and really bad habits and bad lifestyle choices at that age.
Yeah.
Which, in a way, it did save my life that way.
Absolutely.
And then I think I just felt like this immense sense of appreciation for what it did for me during that time in my life. And that's sort of what I guess, made my love for it kind of extrapolate and grow. And then just realizing, like, every time I was teaching, quote unquote, working, it never felt like work. It always felt like somewhere I wanted to be. I didn't want to be anywhere else. I wanted to be in that dungeon training fighters or getting ready for my own fights rather than being out with people on Pearl Street, waking up feeling like shit. And then I think that just sort of manifested into this thing that I always thought about, whether it was at my day job or with everything else I was doing in life. And I was like, that has to be a sign, you know? And I guess I doubled down on it after my second trip to Taiwan, and then tripled down on it most recently after this last trip, where I'm like, okay, this is it for me. I'm all in.
Yeah, and it's cool hearing that, because I think a lot of people find themselves at, a certain point in their martial arts journey, and they say, maybe, where am I going with this? What is this doing for me? But you don't necessarily need to know where you're going with it. You just kind of keep traveling along this journey, and things come up. So when did you take your first fight? I mean, how long were we into Muay Thai training when you decided to take your first fight?
So I think I had 3 smokers at Oscars, maybe 2 smokers at the time before I was about a year in and I made that first trip to Taiwan.
Oh, wow. So you had 3 smokers at Colorado Muay Thai, which they do a good job of promoting smokers here locally, and then you went to Thailand after that.
Yeah, and I don't think I had the intention of fighting so much as I just wanted to pack in this training during this month. I had this like critical time block I had where I didn't have any commitments with school or work, and I just took advantage of it. And then, being presented with a full rules fight after 2 smokers, in hindsight, I probably would have thought about it a little bit more, but I had just drank a 40 and the Thai came up to me and told me to do it, so I did it. And
cool.
It resulted in a lot of damage in that fight I thought the fight was 3 rounds, it was 5. And I ended up winning on points.
Nice.
That was the most mangled I've ever been in a fight. I hope I'm never that banged up again.
Wow. And that was your first fight? First sanctioned
full
fight that counts?
Exactly, yeah. And, I think in a way, I don't want to say it gave me some pause, but after that fight and seeing sort of how stupid it was to take a fight like that on such a short term, I was happy I did. I don't regret doing it.
Right.
But there was something about it where I was like, okay, this is something that can take a little piece out of you, of your soul, if you're not careful and well prepared, right? So I think, doubling down on the idea of staying focused and being extremely well trained and well prepared for every fight you take as best you can is so, so important.
Yeah.
Because taking fights when you're either not prepared mentally or physically can result in severe damage.
Absolutely.
Or a hospital visit.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point to make. So how long after that fight and kind of feeling this abuse that your body took and having this recognition, how long did it take for you to feel confident to fight again?
Yeah, I don't think it was the damage from the fight that deterred me from fighting so much. It was just me looking inward and being a little more self-evaluating and saying, okay, I think 21-year-old Steve thought he was training hard, but really you were training like shit, and you were lazy, and you cut corners, and you weren't doing anything by any means that was appropriate for the intensity of this sport. So that was more the deterrent for me rather than the damage I took. Yeah. And I think looking at that after the fight and realizing that, it definitely provided me a new sense of focus and commitment to the sport when it came to getting ready for fights. I didn't want to fight unless I knew I could commit to the whole 6 to 8 week process.
Right. So that was your first fight. You have 3 smokers up to that point. When is the second fight?
That's a good question, man. I honestly don't remember. I know I did the Colorado Muay Thai tournament at Red and Jerry's years and years ago. I think it was 2012.
Okay.
So that would have been either my 3rd fight or right after the Taiwan trip. And then I did a non-sanctioned event for Muay Thai of Colorado after that in, I think, November. And that eventually led me to the Sparta Combat League with Jeff, fought for them, and then fought for Kickdown as well. So sort of a natural progression, kind of like what you're still seeing with a lot of our upcoming guys. They start with the 5280 or the Muay Thai Association of Colorado and eventually kind of graduate to state-sanctioned events like SCL, prize fighting, Ring of Fire back in the day, things like that.
Very cool. So you've got this tournament coming up here for your team. Essentially, you're coaching in it. What do you envision as kind of goals after that? Was it more coaching oriented, or is it going back to being a competitor? What do you envision?
That's a great question. I would love to go back into competition mode after this. I've learned a lot from this portion of time I spent coaching, but I would really like to kind of kick it back up, kick it into high gear for the WBC tournament in August in Seattle. Amateur WBC tournament looks like a really well-run organization. One of the coaches I know out in California has his hand in it, so I know he's trustworthy, rock solid guy. But that would be my next goal in terms of competing. So I'm going to let it rock for that. And then hopefully, kind of finding the best way to kind of balance the coaching and the fighting for another few years before I fully focus on the coaching and developing athletes.
Cool. And that the WBC tournament would be for a belt?
I believe so. I think I read that the A-class division is the only one that would be competing for the national ranking.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're just competing for the WBC ranking or to be ranked in the top 10, which I'm not looking for handouts when it comes to belt. I'd rather do well and place for a ranking, just so people know the name later on. I'm not familiar with how it looks, but I just want to get a lot of ring time and notch a couple fights in a weekend and really kind of immerse myself in the national tournament environment or that atmosphere and mitigating those nerves and everything else that comes with that.
Yeah, no, I think you have an awesome perspective, both the fighting and coaching, and a great journey up to this point. So I'm excited not only for you guys to go to TBAs and see what your team can do, but also for you as a competitor moving forward.
Thank you, sir.
And I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure to have you. And thanks to our viewers and listeners. Go follow us online at PrizeFightBiz on Instagram. Go check us out on the website at theprizefightingbusiness.com, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook. Thanks a lot.